With the Grammy Awards show still set to air on February 2nd, despite the LA fires that have absolutely ravaged, devastated, and frankly destroyed the abundant music community there in Los Angeles, which is a story about which I'll have much more to say here at The Curious Listener. It's a story about which music lovers like you and me care deeply, music lovers who know that this is a community of artists whose work has formed the soundtrack of our lives for decades. There's much we can do to help them. I'll have much more on that. But all eyes have been on these awards shows like the Oscars and the Grammys. The Oscars postponed by 2 days at last check the release of nominations for the 2025 Academy Awards show. The Grammy Awards, upon last check, still is scheduled to air on February 2nd from Los Angeles. Most recently as yesterday, as I'm speaking to you here on January 14th, 2025, Universal Music Group did say that they are canceling all Grammy related events for 2025, including its annual After a Grammy party and its annual artist showcase, where music executives come and they're invited to watch exclusive performances by UMG affiliated artists and performers. Um, but again, the Grammy Awards are still going on February 2nd, okay, upon last check. And what does that mean? That means the Grammy Awards party circuit, with the exception of that big UMG announcement, is still set to go. And the party in question for this episode of The Curious Listener is a Spotify party that they throw every year for the Songwriters of the Year, those nominated in the category of Songwriters of the Year. This party is described by the AV Club as an opportunity, quote, to give the writers a chance to sing the songs they wrote for other artists before the big night. But there's a little bit of a catch this year, is that those artists, at least 4 out of 5 of them, have responded to this invitation to this party with something to the effect of, what's the word I'm looking for? No. I think we'll take a rain check this time around. I think we're okay, Spotify. I don't think we need to party with you. It hasn't felt like a party for quite some time. It certainly doesn't now for some very specific reasons I'm about to get into. And I think we're going to abstain from partying with the likes of Daniel Elk, co-founder and CEO of Spotify. And these nominees are big-time players in the songwriting game, by the way. They include Jessie Alexander, whose highlights that she's nominated for at this year's Grammys include songs for Luke Combs, whose record Fathers and Sons released in the wake of his smash hit cover of Tracy Chapman's Fast Car. I did a video on that long ago, last year, when he just did great things for Tracy Chapman and her music with his really reverent cover of her beautiful track Fast Car from 1988. His more recent record, Fathers and Sons, came out June 14th, 2024. It's got All I Ever Do Is Leave, Ain't No Love in Oklahoma, both written by Jessie Alexander. I mean, that's a big artist to have her music attached to. Dustin Lynch has that track with Jelly Roll called Chevrolet, which hit #1 on Billboard's U.S. Country Airplay chart. Jessie Alexander's a co-writer on that one. That's on his record Kill the Cowboy. That came out September 23rd, 2023. And you might be thinking, September 23rd, 2023? Why is it nominated for a 2025 awards show? Well, the eligibility period for the 2025 Grammys is September 6, 2023 through August 30th, 2024. So that's barely squeaks in by, a week or two into the eligibility timeframe there. Jessie Alexander has also written a couple tracks for Megan Moroney's record, Am I Okay?, released July 12, 2024, Noah and No Caller ID. Now, Megan Moroney's, these are country artists now. Megan Moroney's record has done quite well, and there's another songwriter, also named Jessie, in this case Jessie Jo Dillon, who wrote the title track for that record. She also is among nominees for Songwriter of the Year, also was among, therefore, the folks who were invited to the Spotify Songwriter of the Year party at the Grammys. She wrote that title track, which cracked the top 20 on Billboard's U.S. Hot Country Songs chart. So these are songwriters whose work is attached to pretty successful, increasingly mainstream, increasingly big time, in this case, mostly country artists. But it's not just country songwriters who are a part of this group. By the way, Jessie Jo Dillon has also written songs for Morgan Wallen, Dan and Shay. I mean, she's done some big things herself. But perhaps biggest of all of them would be Amy Allen, another nominee in the category of Songwriter of the Year, whose highlights include none other than Sabrina Carpenter's excellent, incredibly smart, what I consider to be the finest pop album of the year in 2024, called Short and Sweet. That came out August 23rd, 2024. I rock these tracks in my car all the time. Espresso, Please, Please, Please. Amy Allen is a co-writer on those songs, also on Taste, and wonderfully tongue-in-cheek lyrics on that one. This is what I love about Sabrina Carpenter's work, is the lyrics are clever, they're smart. I love this almost haughty self-confidence that she broadcasts with these songs, these performances, and her writing in collaboration with brilliant songwriters like Amy Allen. And by the way, I'm not alone in my praise of Sabrina Carpenter. Far from it. Trent Reznor, yes, that Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails fame, was asked at the Grammy Awards what he considered to be his song of 2024. And you know what Mr. Nine Inch Nails is, Mr. Hurt, Mr. Industrial rock wonderkind. You know what his answer to that was? Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso. And the person who asked him, she's got a mic, she's asking for whatever broadcast it was, it damn near fell to the floor hearing Trent Reznor say, I really love this Sabrina Carpenter song, Espresso. That was his answer. So, Amy Allen's work is part of the reason why Sabrina Carpenter's material is crossing creative boundaries like this. I mean, that kind of cross appeal with Trent Reznor helping carry the torch of Sabrina Carpenter's pop. Who saw that coming necessarily? Although I'm working on another video about Trent Reznor's work in the film world that demonstrates that he has a far broader creative horizon than perhaps we thought years ago. Tate McRae is another songwriting credit for Amy Allen. She wrote that track Greedy on Tate McRae's record Think Later. It came out December 8th, 2023, which became, by the way, the year-end #1 song of 2024 on the pop airplay chart after peaking at #1 for 8 weeks overall. She's also written songs for Harry Styles. She wrote Adore You, that came out on Harry Styles' 2019 record, Fine Line, with my favorite Harry Styles song on it, Watermelon Sugar, which I play and sing along to with my kids in the car all the time. If you've never heard a 5-year-old sing Watermelon Sugar, you're missing out. You gotta try and make that happen on your end of this video. It's quite adorable. Doesn't stop there though. Those are a few of the nominees in the Songwriter of the Year category. But Raye, real name Rachel Keane, she goes by the stage name Raye, R-A-Y-E. This is someone who has collaborated with Charlie XCX on tracks like I, Us, I, You, Us in 2016, Girls, and Dreamer in 2017. She co-wrote Bigger with Beyonce. It came out in 2019. Her 2022 single, by the way, Raye's got this beautiful little album out that she released in 2020 called Euphoric Sad Songs. I love the album title. I love the album art. I think Raye, too, is freaking brilliant, and you've got to check that record out. Her more recent record, My 21st Century Blues, has that escapism single on it that's done extraordinarily well. To some extent, I kind of favor that 2020 record before she became even bigger, as she certainly has with that more recent success. Check that out, Euphoric Sad Songs by Raye, if you haven't already. Good, clean, smart pop, melody-driven pop, God forbid, these days. It's increasingly hard to find, to my ear. But her 2022 single from that album it hit #1 on the UK Independent Singles Chart. And by the way, and this is important in the context of the topic of this video, which is this boycott of the Spotify Songwriter of the Year party by at least 4 of these 5 nominees. If you listen to songs by Raye, like especially Hard Out Here, you know this woman is not to be trifled with. You know that Daniel Elk and Spotify are not going to scare this woman, okay? So it's not at all surprising to hear Raye express, to some extent, some vocal public on-the-record support for the idea of boycotting this Spotify Songwriter of the Year party at the Grammys. Edgar Barrera is, by all reports, kind of quiet about his stance. He's the 5th nominee in this category on this Spotify Songwriter of the Year party, but there's a very specific problem that the other 4 nominees in this category are trying to address with their boycott of this Spotify party, okay? 4 out of these 5 nominees have confirmed that they will not attend this party. This isn't some made-up story. They've gone on the record. I'll read you their quotes. Jesse Joe Dillon's being the best among them. The problem is this. Billboard, reporting on a prior story by Bloomberg, on May 9th, 2024, put this story out. I'll link to it in the description about Spotify's plan to pay songwriters about $150 million less in royalties after adding audiobooks to its subscription plans. Here's an excerpt from that Billboard story. They write, when Bloomberg reported that Spotify would be upping the cost of its premium subscription from $9.99 to $10.99 and including 15 hours of audiobooks per month in the US, the change sounded like a win for songwriters and publishers. Higher subscription prices typically equate to a bump in US mechanical royalties, right? But not this time. By adding audiobooks into Spotify's premium tier, the streaming service now claims it qualifies to pay a discounted bundle rate to songwriters for premium streams. Given Spotify now has to pay licensing fees, poor babies, for both books and music from the same price tag, which will only be $1 higher than when music was the only premium offering. Additionally, Spotify will reclassify its duo and family subscription plans as bundles as well. Exclaim.ca described the issue this way. Spotify reasoned that by adding audiobooks to its premium subscription tier, it qualified to pay songwriters and publishers a discounted bundle rate for having to license both music and books. A burden, onerous though it may be, that they impose on themselves with this decision of theirs, isn't it? Now, how great is the financial loss potentially for songwriters as a part of this adjustment in Spotify's royalty payment structure? Well, Billboard goes on to say this, or Bloomberg. Actually, this is Billboard reporting on Bloomberg. So they said to determine how great this loss in royalty value would be for the music business, Billboard calculated that songwriters and publishers will earn an estimated $150 million less in U.S. mechanical royalties from premium, duo, and family plans for the first 12 months that it's in effect, compared to what they would have earned if these three subscriptions never were bundled together. And this, by the way, is despite the fact that Spotify is reported to be growing steadily. Per this quote, again from the Bloomberg piece, according to Spotify's latest earnings call, the company is growing steadily, up 14% year over year for premium subscribers and 20% year over year for premium revenue globally. And let's latch on to that word globally for a minute, because the songwriting community, the music and songwriting and artist community around the globe is taking notice of this and speaking out about it. Also from this same story, Billboard writes this: this change only impacts the United States, but there are fears that Spotify's reclassification will have a domino effect around the world, given other major markets like Australia, Canada, Ireland, UK, and New Zealand also have audiobooks now included in Spotify Premium. Roberto Neri, CEO of the UK-based songwriting organization, the Ivors Academy, told Billboard that, quote, if Spotify gets away with this in the US, they will no doubt use it in their future negotiations with European, Asian Pacific, and other territories, and that, quote, what happens in one territory can impact others. There are other big-time figures in the music world who are also speaking out against this. The CEO of National Music Publishers Association, NMPA, was spitting mad in his words on this move by Spotify. He said the following, quote, it appears Spotify has returned to attacking the very songwriters who make its business possible. This is David Israelite, the NMPA's president and CEO, talking about the change to premium when it was first announced. Spotify's, the quote goes on, attempt to radically reduce songwriter payments by reclassifying their music service as an audiobook bundle is a cynical and, here come the lawyers, potentially unlawful move that ends our period of relative peace. We will not stand for their perversion of the settlement we agreed upon in 2022, which you can read more about in the links I'll include in the description of this video. Now, do we remember that there was a time when Taylor Swift had the gumption to remove all of her music from Spotify, by the way? Have we all forgotten about this? When she did this in November of 2014, she took her stuff off there. I realize this was 11 years ago now, almost 10 years ago, going on 11 November of 2025. But a decade ago, she took all her stuff down from Spotify. She was bitingly critical of Spotify at that time. Left her stuff off the platform, by the way, for 3 years. She didn't restore it to Spotify until 2017. I feel like the world of music and media has largely forgotten this since, because streaming now in 2025, 8 years after Taylor reversed her stance on this, has become so popular. We just take for granted that that's just how people consume their music. It's almost unthinkable that Taylor Swift stuff would not be available on Spotify today, right? After all the Eras Tour hoopla and everything. But there's one story I found discussing that episode in Taylor Swift's career with respect to her hot and cold stance about Spotify. Describes Spotify co-founder and CEO Daniel Ek's attitude. Daniel Ek, co-founder and CEO of Spotify, described his attitude on the matter as follows, and I love this. Hey, sorry you can't feed your family or whatever, but getting paid even a tiny amount is better than nothing at all, right? And the story goes on to say, that concern, of course, does not apply to Taylor Swift, who could feed a whole bunch of families if she felt like it. But Eck has made much more recent comments that have sparked outrage, which is a tendency of his among songwriters and artists. He said in a May 29th, 2024 tweet that, quote, well, the cost of creating content is close to zero. And Exclaim.ca seized upon that and put it this way. Well, Eck is correct only in the most technical of senses. Yes, it is possible for anyone with a phone and an internet connection to create content, but that doesn't account for things like recording equipment, studio time, sound engineers, and the innumerable other costs associated with making music, not to mention the time and creative energy that goes into it, adding an extra dimension of bleakness to X use of the word content, seemingly as an all-encompassing word to include social media posts, podcasts, music, and other artistic output. Here's what Taylor Swift back in the day had to say about Spotify. When she decided to take her music off the platform, she said this, quote, music is changing so quickly and the landscape of the music industry itself is changing so quickly that everything new, like Spotify, which it certainly was then, all feels to me a bit like a grand experiment. And I'm not willing to contribute my life's work to an experiment that I don't feel fairly compensates the writers, producers, artists, and creators of this music. And I just don't agree with perpetuating the perception that music has no value and should be free, which appears to be what Daniel Ek is insinuating with tweets like, oh, what, it doesn't cost anything. What do you, if we pay you a penny for something that didn't cost much, you made a penny, didn't you? What are you complaining about? These days, in 2025, artists on Spotify, and there's an important distinction between artists and songwriters, by the way, which we need to get into. It's really important. But artists generally, in 2025, are being paid by Spotify around 0.003 to 0.005 cents per stream. That is 3 1,000ths to 5 1,000ths of a penny. So basically nothing. If you get a million streams, you're only getting a check of $3,000, $5,000 for a million streams. If you had sold 1 million albums in the CD era and you got paid 50 cents per album sold, you made $500,000. And back then, 50 cents per album sold, I'm just pulling that number out of thin air just for frame of reference purposes, just to cut some numbers here and see what we're talking about. Back then, you remember, I've got enough gray in my hair for you to see that I vividly remember the CD era, right? It was that long ago now, it seems. What does a new record, a new CD cost in 1993? I remember paying maybe $16.99 for Tom Petty's Wildflowers when it came out on CD back then at Tower Records. Remember those places? God, I miss them. Virgin Megastore, I miss those days. But that's what it costs. If you're making a lousy 50 cents off of a $17 CD and you sell 1 million copies, you put $500,000 in the bank. These days, you don't scratch that on Spotify with streaming royalty structures like this. And listen, I work in the sports media space, and I've had this discussion with people in that space. I understand the idea that, well, just because you decided to get really good at a particular sport doesn't mean the world owes you anything. I get it. I understand that stance, okay? No one told them to get really good at a particular sport and then just expect their living to come to them. I understand that that's part of the perspective that's, I think, a decent number of people have on issues like this. But what I struggle with is, what is Daniel Ek's moral debt to the music community? Is this moral or equitable? Is it equitable? Is it conscionable? I truly only am asking. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, including him. I truly am interested in sort of taking the temperature of the room here. Do most people think that artists can go to hell and get a job if they don't like it? Or do most people think that Daniel Ek is an a-hole? I don't see a lot of gray area between those two perspectives here. I would love to hear from you in the comments as to your stance on that. And my anticipation is there are going to be plenty of comments on videos like this that don't express a lot of sympathy for the songwriters and the artists. That's what I encounter. Um, and, and I'm just not sure that's the right way to go here, but I encounter it a lot. So maybe I'm wrong. I'm perfectly open to that. But as I mentioned, there's an important distinction to be made here between the songwriters and the artists themselves. Okay, this problem is worse for songwriters as opposed to the artists for whom they write the songs. Compare their plight in the streaming era today to their situation in the CD era. Okay, there's this excellent music blogger, Ari Herstand, who has this blog called Ari's Take. Okay, he's an LA-based musician. He's really committed to providing education on music and the music business. And he described this distinction between the royalty plight for songwriters back in the CD era and the royalty plight for songwriters today in the streaming era as follows. The big issue now, he writes, is, and I'll link to this in the description as well, if you're a songwriter who didn't get the hit on the record, you're not getting an equal cut, whereas before in the CD era, if you wrote some deep cuts on the album, people were buying the full album. If you had a deep cut on a Hall & Oates record that sold however many millions of copies back then, you got paid based on album sales. You didn't need your deep cut to be the hit. You didn't need to write Man-Eater. You didn't need to write Out of Touch for Hall & Oates to score big. You just needed the record on which your deep cut that didn't hit the charts was included. Not the case today. Right? The money is in the hits now in the streaming era. So hit songwriters are earning far more than they did in the CD era, whereas songwriters without the hit are earning far less. Should songwriters earn more? Absolutely. Do I think labels and publishers should earn an equal amount from streaming? Yes. But this will only happen if the major labels agree to it, which of course they won't, because that means they'd have to make less. How much less, you ask? Well, he does put this into some frame of reference as well. Lucian Grange, the over at Universal Music Group, which we mentioned earlier, the most profitable record label on the planet, made $200 million in 2021. More than the total songwriting revenue for every songwriter in the UK. And then Ari writes, come on, Lucian, send a bit more of that the songwriter's way, please. But this is not new. Just because streaming is the latest iteration of this dynamic, this tension between the creators and the executives, doesn't mean, or in this case, executives like Daniel Ek at Spotify, that doesn't make this a new issue at all. There's nothing new about this. I interviewed a professional musician years ago, back around 2008, named Rocky Frisco, who was a keyboard player for Eric Clapton, keyboard player for J.J. Cale, one of my very favorite songwriters and guitar players. And I started talking with him in this interview, which I'll link to in the description, about the music business and his own topsy-turvy relationship with it over a period of many decades. I asked him the following question. Your own long-standing relationship with the music business has undergone quite a few evolutions over the years. Most notably, you retired from the business in disgust after losing thousands in royalties to a corrupt A&R man in the 1960s. Would you mind recounting that episode and why you dropped out of the scene for a while after that? To which Rocky responded with this: I was working very hard to support myself, my wife, and 2 kids when I found out that the Columbia Records guy in charge of my account had embezzled $45,000 from the account. He had been giving the band members money every Christmas to keep quiet about it. But one of the guys had a strong conscience and sent me $500 one Christmas and told me what was going on. Before I could do anything about it, the guy from Columbia died. I'm not sorry I quit playing in disgust, since I spent that time in basic electronic research and racing MGs and Mini Coopers, activities that enriched my life immeasurably. As you can see, Rocky Frisco was a character, as anyone with a name like Rocky Frisco almost is obligated to be. I followed up with this question in my interview with Rocky. Is the music business any more or less corrupt now than it was back then? How, in your view, has the industry changed over the years? He said this: it's the same old corrupt money grubbing sewer with fancy new clothes. It's the same old corrupt money grubbing sewer with fancy new clothes. This was back in 2008, again, before streaming had reached anything remotely approximating its current popularity. So here we are now in 2025. Rocky, God bless his soul, has passed on to the other side since I had the immense honor of speaking with him. But here in 2025, Spotify is playing the part of those fancy new clothes, as Rocky put it in his conversation with me. It's confirmed that 4 of these 5 nominees in the category of Songwriter of the Year are boycotting Spotify's Grammy party because of its decrease in royalties to songwriters by as much as $150 million, okay, over the next 12 months. I mentioned at the top of this video that Jessie Jo Dillon had one of the starkest statements on this issue. She said the following on the record, to her credit: after some thought, I couldn't in good conscience support this initiative given their approach to bundling royalties, Dillon told Billboard in a statement about pulling out of the event, wherein Spotify invites the Songwriter of the Year nominees to take the stage and perform songs they've written for other artists in a room full of their peers. It is very nice, she went on, to be individually honored, but it's better for me and my entire songwriting community to be paid fairly for our art. There are no songs without songwriters. A representative for Ray, meanwhile, said this: that Ray has been, quote, an outspoken advocate on behalf of songwriters' rights, igniting an industry-wide dialogue on the topic. So this is probably an argument without end. Spotify probably never is going to feel compelled to budge on this issue so long as songwriters and artists only take small stands, like boycotting, parties nobody outside music really knows about. I'm not really taking sides here, though I do struggle with Daniel Ek's moral position in all of this. But if the artists themselves share these sentiments expressed by the likes of Jessie Jo Dillon, back in 2014, Taylor Swift, right? Then their only hope is to remove their music from Spotify en masse. That's the only way to leverage whatever power they may have in this situation. I mean, we saw a little tiny example of this when Neil Young got all pissed off at Joe Rogan. He said something about COVID vaccines or something went on in an interview that Neil didn't like. And Neil said, well, it's either me or Joe Rogan. And Spotify's like, okay, I guess it's you, Neil, because Joe Rogan is doing a lot more for Spotify than Neil Young is, legend though he may be. I am a diehard Neil Young fan, as you know from looking at my prior videos, including the very first one I posted on this channel, which was my kind of epic rant on something with respect to a Rick Beato statement on Neil Young's music. But what happened in that case, right? So he throws this tantrum, pulls his music off Spotify. Nothing. Even he reversed his stance on it. Said, well, on basically the final analysis, it just kind of doesn't make sense to sabotage my own song catalog in a tizzy over something like this. Joni Mitchell followed suit at that time. She pulled her stuff off. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, they pulled their stuff off. I forget who else joined him for a time. Joni's music is all back on Spotify now. Crosby, Stills, and Nash were, I think, the quickest to reverse that decision. They were off for, 15 minutes. I'm exaggerating, but kind of. So these are tiny ripples in an infinitely vast pond. They're not going to foment any change if that is, in fact, what these songwriters in particular, who, again, are getting the worst end of this stick, want. If these artists are serious on a broad scale about what they believe to be the inequity in Spotify's royalty payment structure, they've got to create a tsunami, man, not a ripple. These boycotts of Grammy parties, are they just another ripple, or are they the tremor that initiates the tsunami? I think it's just another ripple. And for the sake of artists, especially, as I said at the top of this video, songwriters whose livelihoods are in the balance here, in the aftermath of these LA fires that have absolutely devastated them in their community, they need to find some way of instigating that tremor if, in fact, they think that's their ticket to a more prosperous career doing what they love. And on that score, I say, stay tuned.